All right, we're getting started. So, welcome to the first breakout session of SUGCON. VSTS Nuget with a pinch of HELIX. I like cooking, sometimes at least. For those who do not know me, I'm Ivan Lieckens. I'm the Sitecore lead architect at Cognizant. And yeah, email is not really well readable, but you'll get the deck afterwards. My Twitter handle, and I am part of the SUGCON group who organizes the user group in Belgium. I've also been an MVP for the last 4 years, so that's my credentials. But today we're here for a nice story. And if you go with stories, once upon a time there was a set of principles named HELIX. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about, just a pinch. We have the ALM system in the clouds known as VSTS. Who of you know VSTS? Okay, almost a full room. And I'm not going to have to spend too much time on VSTS itself. Packaging system, NuGet, also familiar, I hope. Not? Good. And we have a couple of others that are strewn in throughout, mainly my friends from Hedgehog TDS and Sitecore ship. There's other ways you can do it, but these are the ways we do it. So that's why I'm taking them in here as minor characters in our story. So first off, we're going to start with the seasoning, which is HELIX. And before we go in, don't miss tomorrow. If you have questions about HELIX, there is the round table that is run by Anders Laub, which is a great moment to ask questions about HELIX if you have questions about it. There is one other guy, and I don't think he's in the room. If you see him, look for him, ask him some questions about HELIX. For those who do not know this man, this is Thomas Elblom. Into HELIX. I think these are all familiar slides, or at least they should be. HELIX Layers, HELIX Dependencies. More about the HELIX Dependencies, how we see things, how we grow things. And it goes on like this. But did everyone just see what happened behind me? For those that have been paying attention, there's two that look awfully similar that are a little bit off. First this one, and then this one. Basically, when I was reading documentation on both of these systems, I saw these two pictures not too far from one another. This is actually what got me thinking, like, hey, there's something similar here, something we could do. But before I show you what I did, I have to give you a disclaimer. HELIX is not meant for reusability. If you want full explanations on that, you can read this later. I'm not going to explain everything right now, but these are things that are going on, and there's people talking about it left and right, a lot of back and forth going on, discussions, interesting discussions. But for a long story, to make it short and memorable, oh dear, I see that one of my slides here might be a little bit out of date, so I'm going to shove them all on for a second. So, even though reusability is not the focus of HELIX, there is a positive side effect to using HELIX, which is reusability. So, and the important thing there is do not try to build your projects in a generic way, because if you do that, you're going to wave way too far off the path and lose track of what you're actually trying to build. But nurture and mature the things that you build, and then you will notice that by default, it becomes reusable. And if you ensure the correct maintenance model, the reason for the build, and keep them all aligned, and you can keep that purity, then you will notice that a lot of stars will start aligning. And when that happens, you can share and give back to the community. And there's one module that I've posted recently, well, a couple of months back to GitHub, which I sadly did not place in here, but I will share it some way in a tweet for all those that are interested. Something that has been nurtured and matured out of the projects that I've been doing, specifically targeted for a specific reason, built with that in mind, and has become reusable, and I can give it out to all of you to use. Now, how did we do these things and how do we work? I have to introduce the main player in our setup, which is VSTS. It's also the first piece of my title, so it would be weird if I did not have this in here. So I'm going to do a small introduction to VSTS, seeing that so many of you guys know about VSTS. So if you have a look at VSTS, there's actually 4 things that VSTS tries to do. Plan and track, which is the tracking of progress, managing of work, planning of work, and when your project starts. Then you have developing and testing. These are all the pieces like writing codes, unit testing, version control, build verification. All those systems are in there. Third arm, release management. This is the automated functional testing environments, integration testing, pre-production environments, staging environments. All of this handled by VSTS. The last one is monitor and learn, and this one is not used that much, but if you take a look, VSTS has an answer for all these things, and where you do not like that answer, expand it yourself, or plug in whatever is your preferred method. So that is why I often say that we use VSTS as the one ring to rule them all. It's because of this. Now, let me introduce my customer. So my customer is DLL Financial Solutions, and they are a financial institution in the Netherlands. They mainly are in the leasing business, and they have quite the interesting setup. So I'm going to give you some quick statistics about the environment I'm talking about here. So we have about 20 Sitecore solutions inside of DLL, 26 Sitecore instances, 3 different Sitecore versions across those 26 instances, and we have more than 4 development partners in the house. So you can imagine this is an environment where there is a lot of need for structure and a lot of need of cooperation, and certain compliance is also part of all of this. And why we use this method and what is the actual business value of it is we have reusability of the code across all of the solutions when we build this way. We have easy maintainability and upgradability without losing flexibility, because a NuGet package feed is actually immutable. So if you commit a certain package version, it cannot be replaced later by something else. And also the main thing there is if you have a new package that comes out, each single project can choose its own point in time where it desires to take the hit of doing the upgrade. Sometimes if there's no breaking changes, it's just like boom, upgrade done. Yay, we have some new bug fixes in there. At other times when you do certain refactors, then it might be that the project team will need to reserve some time and say like, okay, we're gonna put this in the next sprint, because then we can do the nice things to make sure it all works, do all the testing, move on. It also ensures simplified coordination and cooperation, because if you have these packages that exist for a very specific reason, each of these packages can be maintained by a single vendor, or we have a couple of packages that are even being maintained by multiple vendors. Just because their project is also using them, they're actually like almost submitting feature requests to those packages, and we can keep on nurturing and maturing this way. And we have, of course, conformed to company guidelines. There are some packages that we use that contain mandatory changes to the Sitecore system. And that's mostly for compliance reasons, that certain things need to be altered, or marketing communications has certain wishes. And this is one of the main packages that we use, which you'll see also in a second in our list, is the way that they use URLs is different from the standard Sitecore way. Standard Sitecore way, language first, then comes the rest of the URL. They desire to have country first, then language, then the rest of the URL. This is something that most likely a lot of you have done at some point in the past as well. Simple link provider. In our case, it's up in our NuGets. Comes down to every single solution. No one has to ever build that thing again. So how do we go from code down to production at DLL? So VSTS is the first thing that we use, and we have our development process in VSTS, which uses Git. We use the Scrum process template, and we have SonarQube there, which you might say, like, well, what is that doing in the development process? This is basically our quality control during the development process. How many of you are using SonarQube? Oh, okay. Let's say 30% of the room. That's not bad, actually, because I think that too few people are actually doing quality control like that. There's a lot you can learn from static code analysis, and I would definitely recommend it if you're interested. And then we come to the build part, which we simply have VSTS build for. You could use Jenkins, you could use anything else, but we just go with what's there. It's enough for us. If you have different requirements, as I showed you in the previous slide, go ahead, change it. And for release management, exactly the same story. VSTS release management. Everything is there, so very handy. So if we then zoom in a little bit on the development process, how many of you recognize this picture? Ooh, that's 20%. How many of you use Git as a source control? That's okay, that's most of the part, that's good. This is actually Git flow. If you have not heard of it, this is like a way of working with Git, how you branch and how you merge and how you can introduce certain things at certain points in time so you can easily version and continue from there. So we use this as a way of introducing like mandatory pull requests that have reviews, which is really interesting because all of our code at DLL has been at least reviewed by one other developer, which is a strong practice if you want to build quality control into your standard development process. Additionally, if you use the correct version of the SonarQube plugin on VSTS, it will actually automatically add on your pull request the comments of SonarQube so that your developers can not only learn from each other, but instantly also from the static code analysis and fix those issues before the code even reaches the main development branch. So, next development process, yeah. I had to blur this one out. There's a lot of sensitive information here according to my clients. So forgive me the flueness of the image. But this is, of course, the work item tracking that is part of VSTS. And we use the Scrum process template. There's several templates you can use depending on what process you prefer to follow. But in general, I would say that the tracking inside of VSTS can ensure that you can actually link from a single work item down to a build, down to a specific change set, down to a specific release that has been done. And by coupling all of these together, what my testers can do is in the morning when they arrive, they can just look at the latest release that happened, and it actually lists up all the items that are in there. So they don't need to start looking for what should I be testing today. It's actually there in the report for them every morning. Go ahead, start testing. And SonarQube I mentioned for a second. So this is like the dashboarding you get from SonarQube. I'll not go too deep into it because it's not really part, but I wanted to give this to you to show you like this is information that you can achieve if you hook all of your pieces together. Now the build process that we use is also very simple. We do a NuGet restore. This pulls in all the NuGets. We version our assemblies. We build a solution. We execute our unit tests. And then we prepare the artifact. That's on a high scale level how a build runs. All of our Sitecore builds look like this. And in that build solution there, we use TDS to create update packages that we will be installing down on the DTAP street. Now, how does that look in VSTS? Looks a little bit like this. So up there, NuGet restore, version assemblies, build solution, test assemblies. This one you can actually take out if you really want to, not really necessary. And all of this long line here is nothing more than preparing the artifact. Because when the artifact reaches the endpoint, we actually output several packages, one for each service that has to be installed on, or that can be installed on different servers. The release process can actually choose where to install them. We're just preparing them here. We also have several pieces for the content delivery, for the content management. We have, and these are the most things you see here, specific configurations that have to go to a specific environment are also in here. So we have the main block, and then we have the configurations that are specific to a certain environment. Mostly app settings and connection strings and stuff goes in there. And finally, you publish the artifact so that VSTS can do something with it later in the release process. Now we come to the release process. Same thing happens. Very simple, backups and cleanup. It's the first thing we do so that our environment is clean. Then we install the TDS update packages on top of the Sitecore instance. We stop the app pools. We copy the files, we start up the app pools again, and then we do a warm-up script. So we load up the instance, make sure it's there, everything's published, everything's fine. There are several ways you could do this. You can do this on the instance itself and just overwrite the same instance over and over, or you can do slotted deploys or blue and green deployments. There are several ways of doing this, and of course if you do blue-green, you don't have to stop and start app pools. But eventually you have to grow, and there are certain hoops you have to jump through, and I have to fight uphill sometimes to get things done. And it's not always easy also to ensure that you have enough capacity to constantly have new instances being used, because this is not an Azure environment. This is an on-prem environment, and resources are shares, and we have to work with what we have. Now, our other little player that comes in there for installing TDS packages is Sitecore Ship. The Sitecore Ship actually has a VSTS plugin, as you can see, which allows you very easily to put it into your release process. So the only thing you need to do is actually say, what's the package name, where should I find it, and then to what URL should I install it. So if you have Sitecore Ship on your Sitecore instance, you can just install it simply like this. There are other solutions for this. We've slowly also been testing out the Hedgehog package deployer, for example, which can do the same thing. Big difference between those two is that at a certain point in time, this one will actually wait until the full installation has been done, where the package deployer will just execute, and since it's a copy, it will already try to start executing the next step of the release, which is not really what you would desire at some point in time. So we built a custom PowerShell script to handle that part, which then takes care of waiting for the installation to be done. It's creative thinking, and that's also what you should be doing if you start building these kind of processes. It's like fitting pieces together to make a whole solution. It's what we do every day. At least I hope that's what we're doing every day. So interestingly, since we are a financial institution, we have a lot of compliance and overhead. So if you use VSTS to do your release process, there's actually an approval process that you can build into VSTS, which is really interesting if you come across larger clients like mine. So for our dev environment, we have pre-deployment is automatically approved, post-deployment automatically approved. It's a dev environment. We don't really care. Then it comes more interesting as we go to the testing environment. So the pre-deployment of the testing environment is approved by the development team. So only when we say like, okay, now we're ready to push all this to test, that's when this release will continue and push on to test. And we also control the post-deployment approval, saying, okay, what's on this test environment? So it's mostly the pre-approval is done by a developer, the post-approval is done by the tester that is part of the development team. And he will say like, okay, I checked everything that was deployed here, testing environment is deployed, is secure, is tested, everything is fine. Then we can move on to the acceptance environment. And here we have a special team that is the EBS team inside of DLL. And they are actually the platform managers of the Sitecore platform. They actually manage all these 26 instances. So they keep a close eye on what's going on and who's deploying what and is everything fine. And they actually do a special QA before they approve this acceptance deployment. And then the post-deployment there is handled by the UAT team. The UAT team are our business users that actually go out on acceptance and check the deployed solution, whether it is up to snuff with what they have been expecting and what features they desire. And then they approve it if they think like, okay, this is something we can ship to the people out there. Then we come to our production environment. And for our production environment, the pre-deployment is actually our product owner. So the product owner can choose when he goes to production. If all of these approvals beforehand have all been taken care of, our product owner can say, okay, now I want to go to production. And VSTS actually also allows you to say like, I want to pre-approve this at this specific point in time. So you could actually say like, okay, I'm not going to be there this weekend or next week, but you can already set up that approval and then that deployment will run at that specific point in time. And finally, the production acceptance team, test team, will run some health tests on the production environments and prove that. So this is how we have set up the split dependencies and responsibilities between all the different teams, and where they can actually have a say in our release process about what we're doing, how we're doing, and we're fine. So, NuGet, part what we came here for. So we have a lot of foundation and feature stuff on NuGet, and this is basically the list of all the different things that we have turned into a NuGet package. And you will see between all these names there are a lot of things that you actually recognize. These are things you might have built yourself at some point in time. Some of them are really, really general, like for example, the dictionary stuff here. Everyone has done something at dictionary level at some point in time. And this one, switching link provider and the virtual link provider, that's what I was talking about before, changing the URL. So this package is actually part of every single solution. And then we have a couple of features which mainly are nice. And this is the 8.1 era. So we have 8.1 in our ranks. And then we have 8.2 in our ranks. And then there's a couple of these that vanish. And the answer, why do they vanish? Well, in 8.2 something really wonderful happened, SXA. So all of these that are struck from the records are actually replaced by SXA. We no longer needed them because SXA already has a version for them. And I'm quite sure that in your organization, you might find some stuff that belongs here or should belong here. Now, what does a solution look like if you want to build a NuGet package? So each of them has its own solution. Very simple. Web project, pre-processed files, if you have them. If you want to allow some people to change some codes, you might introduce some of these. NuSpec file for all the metadata. You'll see where it ends up soon. T4 templates generation, I'll not go in too deep on that one. We use actually T4 templates generation. We could actually also use the TDS generation instead. So it's basically, again, choices. This is because all of these have been nurtured out of solutions. All of these started as a simple feature inside of a certain project and have then been identified as something that we could share among all our solutions. We have a TDS project, but yeah, if you're using Unicorn, you would have something different here, of course. And of course, we have some unit tests for all of our solutions. We do like to ensure that everything keeps working if we change something. And the result of that looks a little bit like this. So if you would open up the NuGet package that results out of this specific project, you have the metadata from the NuSpec file, you have the generated dependencies, which use the packages.config to identify what you're depending on. All of the content files, which is mainly the configs and stuff you put in there, the compiled binary, and just a small highlight, these are actually foundations from our own. So we just pull them in with the regular dependencies into the feature and they get rolled in. So when I pull in this feature in my solution, this all gets drawn in as well. So what about the TDS NuGet package? And this is one of the nice features of TDS. You could most likely do the same thing with a Unicorn implementation. But there's a NuGet package tab in the TDS project. And there you just need a couple of things. You need to give it a location for the NuGet.exe, which you could just pull with NuGet itself. NuGetting NuGet, it's getting NuGetception here. And it's just basically the NuSpec stuff, but then in fill-in fields, so you fill it all out. And then you get a package that looks like this, which you can pull into your TDS project. So same things, item files and deployment properties file. But now we have packages, now what? So VSTS has something really sweet, and it's up there, build and release packages. So from there, you can click open the list. If you don't have a list, there's going to be a button. But we're mainly interested right now in creating a new feed. And then you have to fill in a couple of things, like a name and what people should access and stuff. And if you created that feed, then you will get options to actually connect to that. So same location, connect to feed. First you have, if you want to get some packages, this is the stuff you put in your nuget.config in your solution. And if you want to push something manually, which I don't recommend, but you could do it, you can use this information to handle it. Now, the build process for our NuGet packages looks a little bit different. So it starts out the same, and then it does these two things. NuGet pack, NuGet push. Again, building a solution is using the TDS project, of course. And if you have a look, what does it look like? You see that this is very small build. It doesn't do a lot of things. It's mainly these two steps that are interesting, the pack and the push. For packing, you can just target it to your CSproj file. A lot of people might target the nuspec file, but you could just as easily use the CSproj file to actually have your package generated. Depends on your personal preferences, I would say. You could also write a very elaborate nuspec file that would pull the project together. So if you have that thing, then finally it's a NuGet push. And it's really as easy as is this screen over here, because all of the feeds you create, if it's part of your VSTS account, you can actually just select it here and have it automatically pushed up there. And it's thanks to, let me go back a little bit, this little two steps here, that everything is versioned correctly. So all of the assemblies that we built, and even the TDS ones, will always carry the version of the build. And that way we can actually recognize any binary, any package out there anywhere, because we've versioned them accordingly, and we always know what the commit was, what the build was, what the work items were that were tagged to that. So, with that, I think I have 12 minutes. That's great. Questions?
How do you handle feed authentication for NuGet?
The VSTS feeds are automatically protected by your VSTS credentials. So only people that have a VSTS account can actually access the NuGet packages on the feed.
So you have each developer put in the credentials in their nuget.config, or how do you handle it?
No, it actually, so if you would open up your Visual Studio.
Oh, you restore them there, okay.
Yeah, or if you do a NuGet restore specifically, then you would need, so you might have noticed a little something on this slide, a little bit back, this thing, the VSTS credential provider. If you have that thing, then it will actually pop up and ask you for your VSTS credentials.
In your build process, you showed dozens of copy tasks. I wonder what's the reason of having this one not to have one transformation task, for example?
Yeah. Let's see if I can find that one. Oh. Just quickly gonna jump slides here for a second. This one. Yeah, thousands of copy tasks, yes. The reason is because if you do a build, there are actually two directories. You have the directory that is containing your build, and then you have what's called the artifact staging directory. So after we run our build, we gather things in output thanks to the publish files that are there. But then we want to assemble that in a very readable and very logical format on the artifact staging. And you can actually see it perfectly here. It's like the base files. So we have several projects. We have the foundation layer, which is the base actually. We have feature, and we have project. So each of these three actually is outputted differently through the build, but they have to be assembled for the artifact. So for each of these, we need to copy over between the actual build output directory and the artifact staging directory. That's the reason why we have these many. And then a little trick you'll also see in here is this one, which is actually, we have two different web configs, because the web config for the CD environment is different than that one from the CM environment. So we actually have those two in there, and they are actually being resolved like this to actually, so if you would look in the artifacts, you would see a Sitecore CD and directory, and in that directory you would find a web.config file. So, but if you look in our project, it would actually be a web cd.config file. So actually also do a little bit of renaming so that it all fits together nicely so that you can just copy, paste, done.
Okay, thanks.
Do you also do partial deployments instead of full deployments? Because this looks like a full deployment.
This is indeed full deployments, yeah. We could, in certain cases, do like partial deployments, but that would like be less dependable, I would say. There is actually one thing in here. I don't know if it's on this one. Yeah, you can't see it here, but because it's actually being handled in the build solution of the TDS. So in TDS, you have a very handy feature which is called only package since a certain date time, and we actually use that to trim down the update packages somewhat, so that it's not like this huge amount of items in there. So that's something we use, but yeah, for the actual files, we just copy paste them over all the time. Also, because if you would do partial deployments, then you would have DLLs that do not have the same version anymore. So since we all specifically version all assemblies, if I see two different versions DLL, I actually know that something went wrong in the release. So it's, yeah, there's plus and minuses there, and I could imagine you doing it, but more of a question why.
Maybe to lessen collision between the different layers. So if you update a feature, you can usually only deploy that one, and instead of deploying the whole solution.
Yeah, if you would update a certain NuGet package to a certain version, you could actually indeed only deploy that specific one. But that also depends if you have breaking changes, yes or no, because the calling sites might have changed. And if you would just deploy that, it could just break down your entire application. So it's not really a risk we're willing to take. More questions? Wow, we're going to finish early. Okay.
I have a question. Are you planning to upgrade to Sitecore 9? Because when you will do this, probably half of this task can be removed, because then you can use rules.
Yes, indeed. That's really going to help us a lot, because as good points, all of these which are copying config, all gone. So I'm really looking forward to the Sitecore 9 era, but they have a huge issue there at my client, which is SQL 2016 is required. And the platform team is very sensitive about adopting new pieces, and it has to go through a whole testing cycle. So it's going to be like somewhere in half a year from now that they have finally completed that cycle, and then we can actually start building, unless I'm capable of getting them to Azure earlier, which I'm trying to do, but also financial institutions, Azure, cloud, it's sensitive subjects. So, if we finish the story, they all rode off in the sunset together, and they make a nice pack, I would say. Thank you.